Back in the 1400s, hundreds of Native American nations lived all across the American continent. Groups like the Iroquois, Cherokee, Navajo, Hopi, and Lakota were farming, trading, and even fighting long before any European ships showed up on their shores. But when Europeans started arriving in 1492, it completely changed everything for the continent. Foreign diseases wiped out millions of people, and new empires fought over who would control the land. In the 15th century, the Spanish set up the very first settlements, like St. Augustine in Florida, in 1565, which is actually the oldest continuously inhabited European established settlement in the United States today. They also explored parts of the Southwest during the 1500s and 1600s. The English, on the other hand, colonized the Atlantic coast, setting up the 13 colonies from New England all the way down to Georgia. The English founded Jamestown in 1607, which was their first permanent colony, and then Plymouth in 1620 by Puritan pilgrims who came over on the Mayflower looking for religious freedom. In 1636, other Puritans in the area founded Harvard, which became the first higher education institution in the British colonies. The British colonies really thrived thanks to farming, hunting, and a busy Atlantic trade that was unfortunately tied to the African slave trade. During this time, the French set up trading posts in the Great Lakes region and the Mississippi River Valley. However, the frontier was a dangerous place because of all the fights between European settlers and Native American peoples, as well as rivalries between the colonial powers themselves. In the middle of the 17th century, British colonies started to get really unhappy with their mother country. London was making them pay taxes but wouldn't let them have a say in anything. This led to big protests, like the Boston Tea Party in 1773, and then a full-on war in 1775. On July 4, 1776, the colonial leaders declared that the United States was its own country. Even though Britain was super powerful, the colonies, with help from France and Spain, managed to win. The war finally ended in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. That's when Great Britain officially said, "Okay, America, you're independent." And just like that, a brand new country was born. After the war, in 1787, they wrote the United States Constitution. This set up a system where the country would be a republic with a federal government. Then, in 1789, George Washington became the very first president of this new nation. During the 19th century, the United States grew very quickly in size. In 1803, it bought Louisiana from France, which doubled its territory. In the years that followed, it got Florida from Spain and pushed for people to settle the Wild West. The pressure on Native American lands really picked up when the Union passed the Indian Removal Act. In the next decade, about 16,000 Cherokees were forced to march from Georgia to what is now Oklahoma on the infamous Trail of Tears. This huge move led to about a quarter of the people dying. The idea of manifest destiny was used to explain this expansion all the way to the Pacific. They took over Texas in 1845. Then came a war with Mexico, and after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico gave up about half of its land. This allowed the United States to add California and the current Southwest, reaching its present-day continental size. But this expansion made internal tensions about slavery even worse. The northern states wanted to get rid of it, while the South defended it for their farming economy. Southern agriculture relied on slavery to provide workers for cotton and tobacco. The industrialized North started to see it as not fitting with Republican ideas. The tension grew with each new territory. Would it be free or slave? In 1860, the Republican abolitionist Abraham Lincoln won the election. The Southern states declared they were leaving the Union and formed the Confederacy. The Civil War, from 1861 to 1865, was the bloodiest conflict in the nation's history. The Union's victory ended slavery, But the Reconstruction period that followed, from 1865 to 1877, was held back by white supremacist violence. The Southern states put in place Jim Crow laws, which made racial segregation legal. They used fear and thousands of lynchings to stay in control. Between 1916 and 1970, over 6 million African Americans ran away from this unfair treatment during the Great Migration to cities in the North and West. By 1880, the United States was the biggest industrial power in the world. Railroads connected oceans. Pittsburgh steel and Pennsylvania oil powered factories and homes. This was the golden age of the big business leaders: Cornelius Vanderbilt, John Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan. To keep growing, the country welcomed many waves of immigrants. Irish people starving from the Great Famine in the 1840s, Germans, Scandinavians, and later Italians and European Jews. Thousands of Chinese also came to build railroads in the West until the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 closed its doors to Chinese immigrants and made racism a national law. After 1965, the rules for immigration became more flexible, opening the way for the large Hispanic, American, and Asian immigration that today makes the United States the most culturally diverse country on Earth. The tough conditions in factories and mines led to the start of workers' movements. In 1886, a protest in Haymarket Square, Chicago, ended in tragedy and became known as the Haymarket Affair. The protest started on May 1st, which is why May 1st is now Labor Day. 8 years later, the Pullman strike stopped the railroad system. The government's crackdown cost lives, but it made people like Eugene Debs more powerful. He founded the American Railway Union, an industrial union, and was a socialist candidate for president. Those struggles led to the 8-hour workday and unions being legally recognized. By 1890, the continental U.S. was already divided into states and territories. The western frontier was considered closed. The nation also looked outward. It bought Alaska from Russia in 1867 and took over Hawaii in 1898. And after the Spanish-American War in 1898, it defeated Spain, taking over Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, becoming a colonial power. Cuba became independent in 1902, and the Philippines would follow after World War II. By the early 1900s, the United States was already the biggest economy in the world and a very important political force. In 1914, World War I started in Europe. The United States stayed neutral in this conflict until 1917. That year, tired of German submarine attacks, and after Germany tried to make an alliance with Mexico, which the British found out about through a telegram, President Woodrow Wilson decided to join the war. The arrival of American troops helped the Allies win in 1918. In the 1920s, the United States saw a huge economic boom. These were the Roaring Twenties, the years of jazz, skyscrapers, optimism, wealth, and wild times. But financial speculation led to the stock market crash of 1929. Everything went wrong overnight, triggering the Great Depression. Throughout the 1930s, widespread unemployment and poverty hit the country hard until President Franklin Delano Roosevelt launched the New Deal. This was a program of public works and reforms that helped restart the economy. The start of World War II in 1939 shook the world again. The United States supported the Allied democracies with supplies, but didn't directly join the fight until the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. From then on, the United States fought on fronts in Europe and the Pacific, using its massive industrial power. The war ended in 1945 with the defeat of the Axis powers. In the Pacific, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to force Japan's surrender. After the Allied victory, the United States emerged as a superpower with its land untouched and a huge military force, sharing global leadership with the Soviet Union. After World War II, the Cold War began, a global rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. There was no direct conflict between these two superpowers, but there was an intense arms race and technological competition, including the space race and indirect conflicts. The United States got involved in wars to stop communism, like in Korea from 1950-1953, which split that country. and Vietnam in the 1960s and 1970s. This last war was very unpopular and costly, and the US had to pull out without a victory. There were times of extreme tension, like the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which brought the world to the edge of a nuclear war. The rivalry also pushed science forward. In 1961, the Soviet Union put the first human into orbit, but the United States responded with the Apollo program, and in 1969, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. This was a huge moment, watched on TV by 600 million people. Over time, the USSR became weaker and finally fell apart in 1991, ending the Cold War and leaving the United States as the main global power. Meanwhile, American society was going through big changes. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, led by people like Martin Luther King, managed to end legal racial segregation and made sure African Americans had civil rights, with laws passed in 1964 and 1965. Inspired by this success, movements for gender equality, feminism, Hispanic rights, the LGBTQ+ community, and environmental protection would emerge. There were also student and counterculture protests, partly connected to the opposition to the Vietnam War. These social changes reshaped life in the United States and expanded the rights of many of its citizens. So, as we've already talked about, when the Cold War ended, the United States was left as the top superpower. And in the 1990s, it really enjoyed a time of economic growth. This was the age of computers and the internet, and the US had unmatched global influence. The United States even got involved militarily in the 1991 Gulf War against Iraq after Kuwait was invaded. This really showed off its military strength after the Soviet Union was gone. But then, the start of the 21st century brought new challenges. On September 11, 2001, the United States suffered terrible terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. This led the government to start what they called the War on Terror. This included the wars in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021 and Iraq from 2003 to 2011. These were long conflicts that caused a lot of arguments both inside and outside the country. In 2008, a huge global financial crisis hit. It started on Wall Street and really hurt the American economy. That same year, Barack Obama's election as the first African-American president was a huge historical moment. In the last decade, the country has seen more and more political division. Populism, which is basically when regular people feel like they're being ignored by the powerful, popped up on both the left and the right. Debates about things like immigration or gender identity are really splitting the country. When Donald Trump came into power, this division got even worse. He brought a more nationalistic and divisive approach to many things. Then in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit hard, causing over 1 million deaths in the United States and also making social tensions even worse. The Black Lives Matter movement is a good example of this. Even with all these challenges, the United States is still a world leader in economics, science, and culture. It has a diverse population and a strong democratic system. Today, it faces issues like social inequality and competition from other rising powers, but its history shows it's really good at changing and renewing itself. And remember to check out my heritage to create your own family tree and discover people you didn't even know you were related to.